Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of AI Diatribe. Some people might have gotten kind of scared and freaked out about this most recent announcement by OpenAI when they dropped their ChatGPT agent. We're going to dive into that today because, as luck would have it, just a couple days later, I had scheduled this recording. I am talking to the CEO of Multimodal.dev, a very wonderful gentleman named Ankur Patel, and we are going to get directly into that, which is quite pertinent because Multimodal specializes in agentic AI, specifically in the healthcare and the finance space. And so this is going to be a very fun and very timely and very pertinent conversation today, talking about all things agentic AI. And also we'll dive deeply into what the ChatGPT agent launch is even going to mean. What does it even mean? What's it even about? So Ankur, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Really appreciate this.
Okay, so let's dive in a little bit. We just mentioned that on July 17th, by the way, for those that even care, we're recording this on July 21st, which is 4 days later. But July 17th, ChatGPT did their agent launch of their new agentic system. This thing can browse the web. It can run code. It can complete some multi-step tasks and do some really fun things. So we'll get into that. But first, I think I want to get a little bit into you specifically, sir. How is it that you went from trading emerging markets and sovereign credit at Bridgewater to going and founding an AI company focused on insurance workflows and finance? What was the turning point that made you go, look, I need to start building some AI solutions?
Yeah, man, it's interesting. 15 years ago, I was a bond trader at Bridgewater. And Bridgewater, for people that don't know, big macro shop. And Bridgewater has incredible data that they use to go trade markets, as you can imagine, right? All hedge funds, they are suckers for absorbing data, analyzing data, making decisions. And so for me, it was at Bridgewater that I got into data science and data engineering. After that, after Bridgewater, I ran a macro fund and got deep into the data engineering, data science game. And then basically one thing led to another, basically going from data science to machine learning, building teams, selling software in the space. And that brings me back to multimodal. In the last 2 years, we've been building agentic AI, right? The latest and greatest, and then selling those capabilities to that audience. So I'm on the other side, right? I used to be on the finance side as an operator. Now I'm on the technology side, selling into that audience once again.
Interesting. Okay, that's a logical path, I suppose. Although some would say that those of us that get into AI were a little bit crazy and a little bit too tech-centric to be able to survive, but yours is definitely a very logical progression to something like that. So kudos there. So let's dive a little bit further into how things have progressed in these last few years. I mean, so you've written books, you've founded multiple companies, you've worked at, like you said, Bridgewater and some of the biggest names in finance. When you look at where AI was when you first started things, when you first started really exploring things versus this ChatGPT announcement of a general agent, what has really surprised you the most over these last few years in that evolution? What is it that surprised you over the last little bit?
Well, I think even the word AI is kind of really interesting, right? So before ChatGPT came out, November 2022, people really spoke about this space as machine learning, right? Finding patterns in data and then leveraging these models to autocomplete paragraphs and such. And that was the extent of it. And I think over the last 2.5 years, you have such great large language models, right? Modern day AI that is able to not just generate paragraphs, but generate full on deep research reports. Coding is an incredible use case of agentic AI. But I think what we're now moving into is it's much more action oriented. That's what AI agents are about. They're not just helping you get insights and answer questions. They're actually performing work. And the scary thing is that the work that they're able to do is now closely mirroring the work that people do using browsers and such. And I think that is quickly moving us from AIs being assistants to AI literally doing work that people would otherwise do.
It's really interesting, the contrast between the academia definition of AI potential and what is actually translating to real life, real world business solutions. I mean, this is where you're on the forefront of that and really kind of riding that wave. So let's go a little bit further into the ChatGPT thing then. So as we said, it can do all these different things, create presentations, connect to your Gmail, connect to your Google
Mm-hmm.
Drive. I mean, it basically acts like maybe an elementary school version of a human being, but like a human being in front of a computer. And so there's really a serious fundamental question here that we need to talk about. So OpenAI, it's going broad with a general purpose agent. It's not highly specialized at all. That differs very strongly from your company because you're going very deep in a couple of specific verticals. And so which of those approaches do you think is going to have a larger impact in the enterprise world? Is there room for both, or is one going to prove to be more essential and necessary than another?
I think horizontal agents like the one that ChatGPT is building out is going to help all of us in our personal lives, very much so. You can think of just like booking reservations, booking trips, working through emails, in a variety of different things you would do as an individual. I think in the enterprise setting, it's interesting. I mean, there is definitely the need for horizontal agents for some of the work that gets done there. Think like outbound motion for marketing purposes, preparing sales memos to go and know who you're speaking with on a customer call or in-person meeting and such. But in these more high domain, high expertise verticals like finance, healthcare, insurance, you do need vertical specific agents that are really specialized at things like underwriting, claims processing, lending. And that's where vertical AI players like a multimodal come in. And so I don't think it's like an either or. You'll have horizontal agents, likely from a ChatGPT or equivalent, that is handling kind of the bulk of the tasks across different departments that are basically common across verticals. But then you will need vertical players that you bring in for these specific vertical use cases that get really good at that nuanced bit. And the challenge there is that that vertical agent isn't going to work out of the box. It could be reasonably good, but it literally needs to learn from your very best people to get to a performant level so that it could do really deep, meaningful work. And that's always the challenge. That's what we're trying to solve with what we're building.
Well, yeah, there's a big difference between here, let me go do something that might require a couple of different compliances that I need to adhere to and make sure that I don't cross boundaries and get sued by the European Union because of something. Or, going and planning to get ingredients for a Japanese breakfast for four. Or,
Sure.
or to
Yeah.
create a slide deck of some sort. There's definitely major differences, not only in the information required, but also the requirements required. I would imagine that that's probably a pretty big minefield that you're having to tiptoe through on a regular basis, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, if you think about like a big bank or big insurance carrier, they have their own policies and procedures. And so the AI needs to be privy to all that sensitive information within an organization. And then the people that are doing this work, let's say underwriting insurance policies, they need to look at the outputs from the AI. And the AI will do a reasonably good job, but it's not going to be great. And then the goal is for the experts to provide feedback to the AI so the AI can learn from it and get better, right? And so if you can make that easier and simpler, then all of a sudden you can develop very specialized AI. And that's the difference between a player like a multimodal versus a generalized agent like a ChatGPT agent that was announced.
Yeah, I think you're right. When AI makes a mistake, when we're looking for a recipe, that's not that big of a deal. When AI makes a mistake in something very finance related or insurance related or heaven forbid medical related, that could be a serious, serious problem in terms of consequences, right?
That's exactly right. And that is the difference is like the bar for what's acceptable is materially higher in a regulated space like this. And so we have different tolerance, right? We can tolerate a general agent doing something that's okay out of the box and for our personal lives is perfectly fine. But in these areas where compliance and regulatory requirements are so high, you need that nth degree of agent that is really well trained. And if it can't perform at that level, you won't be able to roll it out in a production setting.
So speaking of performing at that level, it's interesting how this announcement is, dare I say, sensationalized. It really is a big flash in the pan. I mean, goodness gracious, we've got an agent that can do all these wonderful things. But the question is, how does that compare to reality? Because AI is just awash with people that are creating hype and creating almost panic and fervor and excitement about what AI can do versus what's actually happening in the enterprise AI space. So what do you see as the difference? I mean, what's really happening in business right now versus all of this hype? Is there hype that we shouldn't be paying attention to or doesn't make sense? Or is there an element of truth in this?
No, there's a lot of truth in this. And I would argue that consumer applications and consumer experimentation with AI is running well ahead of where enterprise is. Because for all the reasons we mentioned, compliance, regulatory concern, enterprise is a little bit slower to adopt. But what's so groundbreaking with OpenAI's ChatGPT agent, it's just combining a couple of disparate capabilities in one. So you mentioned accessing the browser, being able to use browser capabilities. That's one. The second thing is it can go and generate code and work in a code setting using the terminal. So it can operate at that level, at a code level. And then it has deep research capabilities, right? OpenAI had deep research, but deep research couldn't work with the browser, and the browser couldn't work with the terminal. So it's really bringing all these together. In some ways, it's like when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, it wasn't just a phone, it wasn't just a text messenger, it wasn't just an internet browser, right? It wasn't just an email client. Like it brought all of those capabilities in one, and that's where magic started to happen. So I think this is a massive breakthrough from OpenAI, and I think that it will take time for enterprises to adopt it, but it will shake up enterprise in a big way over the next 12 months.
I think you're right. It's really interesting because there's strategy and then there's tactics. And I think the AI world right now, there was a quote by Sun Tzu where strategy before tactics is the long way to getting what it is that you want, and tactics before strategy is the short way to failure. And there's a whole lot. I know that quote probably isn't exact, and someone can look it up and correct me, but in essence, that's relatively true because there's so many people out there right now that are like AI. I gotta implement this thing wherever I possibly can. This is leading to a seriously high failure rate in proofs of concept. Like 90% is the figure that's being kicked around lately, that 90% of POCs or proofs of concept as it relates to AI implementation are failing. That's kind of a big. So when you're talking to companies specifically, you obviously have to prove that you can have a significant impact, that it can make it out of the POC stage, that it can provide a tangible, measurable ROI. So what are some of the biggest barriers that you're experiencing in trying to relate that to these people and make that type of stuff happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being methodical, right? And like I think you mentioned this early on, the strategy piece is really critical. So which use cases you identify really do matter. So you got to spend the time up front to identify the appropriate use cases. The second thing is you want to make sure you have the appropriate set of data to tackle that use case. And if you don't have data, there are ways to assemble a data asset, but I think access to data or access to assembling data quickly matters. Then the other thing is that you do need the right people around the room. And that means business people as well as IT and engineering professionals, because it's almost like you need the village to go and tackle a hard use case. It can't be just like a one-off individual trying to do this. And in enterprise, this really matters because like you want to get adoption and buy-in and basically that kind of momentum to push it through. And the last big thing is you need to have success criteria. So what do you count as success for the proof of concept? Because if you don't have that, you don't even know what your North Star is. But if you generally do that well, so A, identify the use case, B, secure the data, 3, like have the right people around the room to go work on this, and then D, have the success criteria earmarked up front, then when you get to doing the proof of concept, you have a higher chance of seeing it through into a more production capacity. And at the very least, even if it doesn't make it into production, you will learn a lot, right? And the pace and quality of learnings also is an important part in the overall journey, right? So I think we need to keep that in mind, which is even if there's a high failure rate, if you're learning through that failure, that's going to be one step closer to being successful.
Well, and you raise a really interesting point in that right now, a lot of, dare I say, AI work, if you want to call it AI work, is preparation steps for actually being able to do this stuff. I mean, you have a lot of companies that are having to invest in infrastructure, that are having to invest in cleaning up their data, making sure their data is structured in a way that can actually be usable by AI. And all of these preparatory steps that may not necessarily immediately show a tangible ROI. So hanging your hat on the ROI statistic alone may not necessarily be 100% the right way to do it initially. I like the way that you said that. Let's make sure that we're gauging what is success, whether that's some sort of a metric or something else that doesn't necessarily distill down to a tangible figure of ROI. One thing you didn't mention directly, but I think would be good to make sure to point out, is that risk is a big deal. We talked about this just a few moments ago when, getting a recipe wrong is no big deal. Getting something wrong in a financial transaction could be thunderously bad. And so I'm sure that in the insurance and the finance areas specifically, risk tolerance is extraordinarily low. They're not going to tolerate very much risk. But there's that human element, and really by tackling that human element and getting that buy-in, whether that's executive education, whether that's frontline education, to help them really understand what it is that the AI is going to do, the process it's going to take, where it's going to be involved in these certain steps of these different procedures and stuff like that, really gets them a little bit more, shall we say, amenable to taking that risk. Would you agree? Is that something that you observe in your work today?
100%. So I think that's the governance and the trust piece, right?
Yeah.
Which is AI can't be a black box in this domain. You need to be able to have some level of observability and explainability around the AI. So what did the AI look at? In light of looking at that, what did the AI do or recommend that you ought to do and why? And if you can go and trace those steps, you as a human being in charge of a very sensitive workflow are able to develop trust around the AI. And then over time, that then gives you confidence to actually deploy it in a production setting. And that's the whole point of a proof of concept. And then the next step, a pilot, which is, can you create a sandbox environment so you can learn how the AI operates, develop comfort? Because there's a whole degree of change management that needs to happen before you basically allow AI to handle something that is inherently just bears a lot of risk, right? Not only financial risk, but reputational risk, because a lot of these banks and carriers, one small failure from AI is absolutely catastrophic to the brand and the business at large.
Yeah. Very, very, very sensitive time for agentic AI. You got to make sure you're doing it right. And that human in the loop element is really very important. I would imagine that you are making sure that human in the loop stays in there even past the POC stage to make sure that it's getting things good. Have you experienced a time where it ever really is okay to just take the human in the loop out, or are you having to do a temporary audit every once in a while, or is it an active what does that look like in a lot of your use cases? How far does the human go from the loop, or are they always in the loop?
Yeah, so initially, human loop is there for every single execution, every single query that happens. And part of that is not just because the task is hard, the AI, you need to kind of monitor the AI, but we actually use that to develop feedback from human experts to the AI. So we're storing all the human loop changes that are made, using that to coach and provide feedback to AI to get better at its work. It's no different than basically having a new employee that might have raw talent and potential, but needs to be coached by a more veteran employee on how to do hard work. And then you basically allow the employee to have more autonomy and then start working. So usually we start with everything gets human in the loop. And then what we do is, as we get more and more feedback built into the AI, you can see confidence scores improve. We then allow the AI to be able to do straight through processing, so essentially skip parts of the review. And even the ones that are reviewed, there is some audit. So usually it's about 10, 20% of that still gets audited. It might not get audited real time, but it gets audited in some sort of batch capacity later on. Again, to make sure that we develop good trust around this as we kind of move into a more autonomous setting. But the goal here is to introduce more straight-through processing, more autonomy as the AI gets more and more coaching and more feedback and you develop more trust. And there are going to be some parts of the business that you're okay offloading 80, 90% to the AI for. And then there are going to be other parts of the business where you don't want to basically offload any to AI. But it's not that the AI isn't providing value in those areas. It is, but it's going to provide value in a way where it's going to maybe get it to the 5-yard line. So it's going to package something together, or it's going to make recommendations, and then the human in that role is just doing simple last mile review, and that's going to save tremendous amounts of time and cost in the workflow. So that's also a win in a different way.
Couple of really great things you mentioned there. One, that was a really great way to talk about reinforcement learning, man. I mean, for those of us that are geeky about these different terms and nomenclature, I heard you talking about reinforcement learning, and I'm going, hey, I know what he's talking about there. So that's great. The second thing is you're right. AI is in an augmentative stage right now. It's not in a replacement stage. There's always going to be some percentage until we hit that AGI level. There's always going to be some segment of that stuff that needs to be covered by a human. But a lot of people are predicting that we're going to hit AGI here in the next few years. I'm really curious as to your thoughts on this. Where do you see things going over the next, I don't know, 2-3 years? I mean, in light of OpenAI's announcement for their agent and everybody's talking about it, this has increased the fervor of, oh man, the singularity is closer. What's your take on this and what's your timeline?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that you have AGI, so artificial general intelligence, but then you have probably the more popular term today, which is superintelligence, right? So you
Yeah.
could look at like Meta, the superintelligence lab, and such that are cropping up. And so, I think my perspective around AGI was like, how do you define AGI? When do we know when we're there? But if you think about it, it's like AI is better than the median person at many things. You can even argue most things when it comes to knowledge work. Like it's going to be better in some ways than the median lawyer or the median accountant or the median copywriter. And so in some ways, like it's already reached the level of a median human at most items in knowledge work. Right now, the question is like, how broad does that base need to be for us to say it's actually at or above kind of human intelligence? It's a tricky definition, but I would say AGI is like well within scope. What's trickier is, can it get to and exceed expert performance? And I would argue that in certain arenas, that's also now within scope of the next 5 years or 10 years. So far in our near future, that is possible if we keep the trajectory. And that's a big if, but if we keep the current trajectory. But I think odds are that it is going to be possible even within that time frame, just given the kind of the rate of progression that we're seeing. Like my big thing, and I've worked in machine learning and AI a long time, is you don't want to over extrapolate trends, right? But if you look at the last 2.5 years from ChatGPT coming out November 2022, present day July 2025, we're seeing that pace ramp up, not even slow
Yeah.
down, but ramp up. And so it's hard to argue against AGI and then even super intelligence in the near future.
I'm with you. Moore's law times 4 is kind of what we're experiencing right now as it relates to the advancement of AI. It's a little crazy. Just out of curiosity, are you seeing much in the way of any sort of impact on jobs in the finance or insurance industry, any sort of displacement effect like we're seeing in software development right now?
I think software development and also marketing, maybe even some sales functions, I think are seeing a big disruption. I think in finance and insurance, so here's the interesting thing. In insurance, I'm not sure if job loss is the thing that a lot of insurance professionals should worry about, because in some ways, AI needs to fill the void of a demographic trend that's happening, which is a lot of professionals in insurance are getting older and they're aging out, they're retiring. And there's not enough young people that are entering the insurance arena. So in some ways, the demographic trend requires things like AI to step in and help close the gap. So I'm not sure if like rampant job loss is something that should be top of mind in insurance. It's not happening, by the way. Like I think more insurance carriers need more talent than is available. So that's kind of one big paradigm. I think finance is a little bit different. Finance does attract a little bit more like younger professionals and such. And I think on the margin, you probably will see fewer analysts get hired, fewer junior developers get hired, because the ones that are really good at their job, the really experienced individuals coupled with AI, they're going to be able to handle more volume, right? More units of work. So I don't see any massive rampant job loss, but it's hard to imagine a future where job loss isn't something that is a byproduct of AI coming in, particularly because, as I mentioned earlier, if AI is able to get to median, if not expert level performance, then all of a sudden the bar for the workers that need to be met, like the human workers to be met, increases. And if you're not at that bar, you just won't get hired. And that on the margin will lead to job loss, right? Just a question of like how much job loss, and then are new jobs going to be created, new roles essentially created as a result of the AI influx, which I also think will happen, right? You have more people that are getting into AI development, AI monitoring, human in loop capabilities with AI governance. Like there's a lot of things that are creating new quote unquote roles in this space as well.
When you were talking about the insurance industry and you're talking about a lack of influx of new people going into that industry, and so it's like there's a little bit of a population replacement problem going on there, which is really interesting because that's what a lot of people are talking about with AI and robotics, specifically in China and some Asian countries where the population decline is just going down like this. And so it's really interesting because I kind of wonder, is that going to be a boon to a number of industries that maybe haven't quite been as appealing or as attractive to people? Where we're going to have issues is, like you mentioned, in areas where AI has a definite impact that it can make. We recognize that. We see where it's going. We see that it's going to have that impact. And yet, how many people are actually preparing for that within those industries and as they approach entering those industries? It's going to be a real change on the education front, which is highly applicable to me being a professor. I just, it's something I'm looking at very, very closely with very much interest. So do you think that we're going too fast? Do you think this stuff is happening too fast? I mean, we talk about the rate of change just going exponential. Is it too fast for humans to handle?
I think that is the concern, which is like this technology is evolving, essentially getting built far faster than previous technologies, and it's having a bigger impact far faster. And so the question is, can economies at large, can organizations at large, can individuals en masse basically acclimate to the pace of change that's happening coming down the pipe? That's the big concern, right? I would say for now, it's measured enough that I think we're okay, but these things compound. So, it's like in November 2022 felt like things were maybe like, okay, like you saw this thing come out, it was valuable for the next 6 months, like it didn't change that much. And then if you fast forward 6 months later, now all of a sudden there's a massive inflection point, and then 6 months and 6 months. And so as long as these things compound in the way that they have had, I think that is a concern, maybe that things are happening too quickly. But again, once the cat's out of the bag, like there's no slowing down. Everyone's economic interest, whether it's governments or companies like an OpenAI or Anthropic, their mission at large is to continue building at breakneck speed, because that's how they go and maximize profits in a capitalist economy, right? And so there's no like, you can't put a pause button. I think the best thing you could do is stay on top of the trends, use the tooling, upskill yourself, upskill your organization, whatever it might be, to stay competitive. But I think there will be massive winners and losers. I mean, that's just a natural byproduct of all technology inflection points, and that will be the case with this one as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very fun next few years to observe and see what the heck happens, You're touching on something that I actually wanted to dovetail into, and that is, I like to end these episodes with some practical advice, not only for business leaders and corporate leaders, but also individuals as well. And you mentioned a couple of really key things, right? Stay on top of the trends, stay on top of what the use cases are that are going to apply to you in your business and in everyday life. Are there any other real nuggets of information that you would relate to business owners or senior executive management in companies that might have had a little bit of fright, dare I say head in the sand type thing going on, but it's now getting to the point where the ground is rumbling and you can't keep your head in the sand anymore. You're going to have to pop out and take a look. What are some other little pieces of information that you would give to business owners and to individuals to help them continue on this journey of getting ready for a world that is awash in AI capability?
Yeah, so both for individuals and, let's say, leaders, managers of teams and organizations, the biggest advice that I have is spend $200 a month. I know it sounds like a lot, but $200 a month on various pieces of software to see what these pieces of software are capable of. And you could rotate in and out of some of the pieces of software. But, if I were an individual today, it would be ChatGPT, Perplexity. You probably want to go and check out some vibe coding platforms as well, like a Lovable, a Replit, a Bolt. If you are a programmer, use something like Cursor or Windsurf for Claude Code. And these are just a handful, right? But you want to get your hands dirty with a variety of pieces of software, see what their capabilities are. So, for example, ChatGPT Agent, go test it. Go test out one of these agentic browsers that are coming out, like Comet. Because if you don't, then all of a sudden you miss out on all the learnings that you would get. But I think here's kind of my second point around this, is that it's not enough that you just do it yourself. If you run an organization, you need to make sure the rest of your organization is also absorbing AI as quickly as you are. Otherwise, there will be parts of your organization that are left behind, and you don't want that. So if you're a marketing team, if you run a marketing team, have the marketing team have $200 a month or whatever it might be per person to go and spend on marketing software that is leveraging AI, whatever best in breed software there is. Same thing in sales, same thing in engineering, same thing in product or design. I think you have to be investing in this way. I know the dollars end up to being something more substantial, but $200 per employee across the organization per month is well worth it, because for your company will learn together a lot faster than if you hoped that each of the employees kind of did it on their own. So make that budget available. And the B is that the gains from learning how AI works and then using it to improve the quality of work you do individually and as a team and as an organization has massive dividends, right? These dividends compound. So those would be my pieces of advice. Like, it's not enough just to read. You have to get deeply hands-on keyboard using some of this.
There's no experience like practical game experience.
That's right.
You know, you can be in AAA all you want, and you can look at those major league pitchers, but until you actually step in the batting box and see that fastball coming at you at 101 miles an hour with a little bit of a cut, you're not going to be able to swing the bat and hit that ball. You just got to be able to have some experience there. Great points. Very great points. Now, last fun question. Let's say 5 years from now, we're looking back at this OpenAI ChatGPT agent moment. What do you think we're going to remember about this inflection point? What is it that was so cool about this right now that's going to make us go, that was a point in history that was pivotal?
I think we're going to stop seeing these OpenAI and other players as just pure model companies. I think we're going to realize that they're actually application layer companies that started out as model providers. More and more of our experiences will be deeply intertwined and connected. So we won't think about using, different models for different needs. It'll just be a singular experience, right? That brings it into motion, all disparate capabilities, so it feels very fluid. So here's the interesting thing. When we look at ChatGPT agent 5 years from now, we'll realize that the way we've been using the internet is very clunky. You have to log on to websites, you have to authenticate into your accounts, you have to take a bunch of clicks to do anything. I think in the future, we won't do that. We will have a more conversational way to tell AI, ask AI, whatever it is, to go and do something. AI will then use what we've built, essentially modern day internet, to go and peruse the different sites, log in, authenticate, have a bunch of clicks, put something into a cart, whatever it might be, perform an action, and then report back to us saying, here's what I did, and here's what the net result is. And if you could imagine how empowering that is, paying your bills, going and booking flights, canceling the reservations you might have, figuring out what emails you need to respond to and responding to them automatically, it's going to free so much more human time. Now, the big question is, with all that time we free up as individuals or as employees, where do we reinvest that time? I think that's the big question that we'll have to turn to. But I think this is going to be a moment in time where we realize the way we've been interacting changes overnight, with AI doing a lot of the work, freeing up time for us to do other things along the way.
This has been a fantastic conversation, Ankur. Thank you very much for spending the time. I am really grateful.
Thank you, Jason. And I really appreciate the questions. It's always great to share some of our experience here. So I appreciate you having me on the show.
You bet. All right, everybody, that's your AI Diatribe episode this time. Mr. Ankur Patel, thank you so much for the time that you've spent. If you guys are curious about what their company does, go to Multimodal.dev. And you will find it quite fascinating. And we'll see you on the next episode. Make sure that you do all the likes and the subscribes and the follows and all of the things on all the different social media channels, because we're not done. We're going to keep going. We've got other episodes coming in the future. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.